Task Force on COVID-19 presents 6th interim report on the current phase of lockdown to President Buhari.
He's happy about what we're doing, and he believes that our efforts have tremendously assisted.
Security challenges in the Northwest dominate discussions as President Buhari meets Katsina State government.
The hope is that the military, including the police and other security agencies, have been given a marching order to control the situation.
Petroleum Products Marketing Company announces new ex-debt price of premium motor spare.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we take on the third part of COVID-19 and sharing experiences.
To further enlighten Nigerians on the reality and the devastating effects of COVID-19, NTA Good Morning Nigeria began a series of survivors of the virus sharing their experiences.
Now, in the last edition, which was the second part of the COVID-19 and sharing experiences, we assembled some survivors, including a state chief executive, a deputy governor, and some medical practitioners who recovered from the virus.
Indeed, the guests gave a graphic picture of how the virus began to affect them and the symptoms experienced while the virus lived with them.
That's right, Kyria. Now, some of the symptoms our guests mentioned include loss of appetite, severe fever, persistent cough, and difficulty in breathing, among others.
Now, the surprising thing is that most of them could not say specifically when and how they got infected with COVID-19 in the course of their regular duties.
However, their experiences vary from one person to the other, depending on the degree of infection and comorbidities.
Now, the guests who described their experiences as unpleasant said, of course, a good number of Nigerians who are treating malaria might have COVID-19 because it is absolutely difficult to differentiate malaria from COVID-19 except by test.
Well, they indicated that those who continue to doubt the existence of coronavirus are taking a huge risk because COVID-19 has no respect for anybody, no matter the status or position.
Now, the guests emphasized the need for testing to be scaled up to stem the spread of the virus in the communities, especially now that there is no known cure for the virus.
Now, so with these experiences being shared by survivors, are Nigerians largely still in denial of COVID-19? Should Nigerians continue to also resort to the natural method of treatment as there is no known vaccine for COVID-19 at the moment? Should home management be adopted as a way to handle the virus? Now, what type of risk communication should be further ramped up in order to drum home the message for people to take precautions as more economic activities resume? And what should be done in terms of scaling up testing and indeed, ultimately, when Nigerians come to terms with the reality of the global pandemic? These are some of the issues we intend again to find answers to as we take on the third part in the series of COVID-19 and sharing experiences. It's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of NTA. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Kirian Umaya. Thanks for joining us. And we are transmitting Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA live from our studios here in Abuja. We shall bring to you Good Morning News and also serve you other complementary segments in the course of the program. But let's join Musbao Dan Wahab with the morning news before the rest of our engagements this morning. Hello, Musbao.
Good morning, Kirian, and good morning, Kingsley. Here is the morning news. President Muhammad Buhari has received the 6th interim report on the current phase of the coronavirus lockdown, expressing satisfaction with a high sense of patriotism, professionalism, commitment, being exhibited by members of a presidential task force, PTF, and other frontline workers in the task of containing the pandemic. PTF chairman and secretary to the government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, who presented the report, said despite the significant number of patients recently discharged and drop in number of infections, Nigeria has yet to get out of the woods.
Very encouraging words of commendation as a task force. He's happy about what we're doing, and he believes that our efforts have tremendously assisted in creating the awareness.
On health and safety of Nigerians, the federal government says it intends to examine every possible option in the development and distribution of vaccine against the COVID-19, emphasizing that the health and safety of Nigerians is a priority. The COVID-19 vaccine trial is ongoing in part of the world and is about to enter the third phase. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, has confirmed 457 new cases of COVID-19 in Nigeria. The new cases recorded from 21 states indicates that Lagos has the highest number of new infections with 137 new cases, followed by the FCT with 76. Plateau has 40 new cases, Rivers 35, Enugu 34, Oyo 25, Abia has 23, while Delta has 12 new cases. Other states include Edo and Ebonyi with 11 each. Cross River and Kwara states have 10 each. Kaduna has 9, Anambra 7, Ogun 5, Imo and Bauchi states have 3 new cases each. Osun and Nasarawa have 2 each, while Kano and Ekiti states have 1 new case each. Nigeria has now recorded 44,890 confirmed cases of COVID-19, which 32,167 have been successfully treated and discharged, while 927 unfortunately died of the virus. Now, issues relating to the challenges of security in the Northwest region and ongoing effort to contain the situation for sustainable peace, growth and development dominated discussions as President Muhammadu Buhari granted audience to Governor Aminu Bello Masari of Katsina State.
The hope is that the military, including the police and other security agencies, have been given a marching order to control the situation by all means. With the current operation going on, I am sure before the end of this rainy season, people can go back to normal life.
Still on security, strategic to air operations across Nigeria, the 407 Air Combat Training Group, KNG, is being prepared to receive an important visitor to further enhance these operations.
We are talking of 12 additional aircraft. That's a huge number. It will certainly make a lot of difference. We are satisfied with the level of work going on, our reactivation efforts. We are particularly happy that we have technicians there that are doing a lot of work in terms of getting more engines.
The downstream subsidiary of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC), the petroleum product marketing company, has announced a new ex-depot price of premium motor spirit, also known as petrol, of 138 naira 62 kobo per litre, usually about 15 naira lower than the pump price. The ex-depot price is what depot owners sell the commodity to retail outlets after accommodating the cost of transportation from the depots to their retail outlets, among other costs, as well as marketers' margin. A statement signed by Mohammed Bello, manager sales, the PPMC, disclosed that the new price takes effect from August 5, 2020. Now, all efforts made so far by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, for safe conduct of elections during this pandemic will be put to test this Saturday during the Nasarawa Central State Constituency by-election. INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu is therefore in Nasarawa State because the success or otherwise of this election will form a template for the Edo and Ondo governorship elections.
No face mask, no voting, but there is need for clarification on this. The Commission is not insisting on surgical face masks. Any face covering will do.
Now today I'm calling on them that we should come and strictly abide by the kind of advice.
They should not allow a system where they're leaking.
And after inspecting the COVID-19 personal protective kit for the election, INEC also held talks with representatives of political parties and violence-free polls. That's the morning news. The program Good Morning Nigeria will continue in just a moment with Kingsley and Kirian. Good morning.
And the program is still Good Morning Nigeria, and it's now time for us to do a newspaper review for today.
Newspaper reviewer Bayo Atoyebe is here with us this morning. Bayo, good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, Bayo, you're welcome. It's good to see you. Let's begin with the Nigerian pilot. Aviation workers threaten to shut down over massacre. That's on page 34. A police disrupt revolution now protest. Arrest over 60 in Abuja. That's on page 10. Now, the lead story on the Nigerian pilot. U.S. raises alarm, warns that ISWAP, Al-Qaeda, plan to overrun West Africa, says extremist groups strategizing to re-establish themselves in the region, that some aggrieved local terrorist groups were being galvanized, as Boko Haram reveals its presence in Niger State via video. That's on page 8. Alleged 75 million naira bribe. Panel orders arrest of Magu boys. That's on page 5. We are making efforts to end banditry. Governor Masari of Katsina State. That's on page 7. You can't regulate broadcasting as a politician. Ex-DG NTA tells Lai Mohammed. That's on page 8. Edo Deputy Speaker impeached. It's on page 10. Alleged 36 million naira contract scam rocks Kogi Health Ministry. That's on page 7. Mystery fire God's Accounts Department of ECOWAS Secretariat. The story can be found on page 8. Major fuel price increase looms. It's on page 5. That's, of course, at the bottom of the Nigerian pilot. Kingsley.
Okay, we'll take a look now at the Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust, Al-Qaeda infiltrating Northwest. U.S. alerts Nigeria. That's on page 4. 22 banks and others record 89 billion naira drop in profit. Details on page 17. This story says outrage as marketers increase fuel price to 150 naira per litre. Hike will worsen inflation. According to experts, small businesses at receiving end. That's attributed to the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Federal government keeps silent. That's the last of the three riders to that headline. And you can see the photograph there of the filling station with the pump price indicating 148 naira 70 kobo at Agidingbi. That's in Lagos yesterday. Police arrest harsh revolution now protesters. That's page 6. Gombe community where the earth swallowed 300 homes. 48 hours after endorsing Isaiah Yamo, Edo Deputy Speaker impeached, page 36. Bayo.
Thank you, Kingsley. Let's start with the update on COVID-19. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has emphasized that there is a need for all to continue to take responsibility so that the economy can gradually catch up. Dr. Sani Aliyu, the national coordinator, cautioned that Nigeria cannot afford another lockdown. He therefore warned that a second wave of pandemic would destroy the economy and also result to too many deaths. He enjoyed businesses that are now going to enjoy opportunity of reopening gradually to ensure that measures are adopted and enforced to ensure that everybody is protected. He said the PTF will provide data that is driven by scientific advisory to protect all of us. However, our knowledge of prevention should translate to daily behavior at home, at workplace, at religious centers, so that we can all effectively fight COVID-19. Talking about COVID-19 update, 457 new cases were recorded in 21 states. Lagos shot back with 137. Aside from Lagos, FCT has 76. All the others had below 40. For a long time now, the numbers are gradually receding. Unfortunately, there were 17 deaths yesterday, bringing the total deaths now to 927. There's some interesting news, however. Jigawa State has gone 19 days without any reports. Zamfara has gone 17 days, no report. Kebbi, 14 days. Sokoto, 10 days. So gradually, we're beginning to bend the curve. But the war is not over until it is over. Kogi State has gone 32 days without any COVID-19 record. But, you know, there's a contention between Kogi State and the NDDC. Just last week, the NDDC sent a delegation to Kogi State, and they are already working in consonance with the COVID-19 team. The National Association of Polytechnic Students have said that they are going to protest because the continued closure of tertiary institutions becomes unnecessary. The president of the association, Oladere Adetunji, says that if markets, workplaces can be reopened, there is no justification to continue to keep tertiary institutions closed. They said that they should provide for tertiary institutions guidelines for them to reopen and therefore set a specific date for reopening. The Polytechnic Students Association also said that academic staff union that refuse to go back if they find it necessary, government should stop their salary. They said that in 14 days' time, if something is not done about it, they will be left with no option but to take to the streets. Meanwhile, Daily Trust has reported that the Abuja-Kaduna train service that resumed is now plagued by very low patronage. They say in 5 days that it's been running now, the passenger total population is just less than 5,000. And when it was running full, the range of passengers was between 4,000 to 5,000 a day. The reasons are not far-fetched. The passengers interviewed is that they are saying that the increase in fare 100% is actually becoming a problem. But again, come to think about the economic demands. Until COVID-19, each coach was conveying 88 passengers. Presently, they are forced to convey only 56 passengers. And the Minister of Transportation the other day was saying that it costs about 120 million before now to run the running cost by now, because of the COVID-19, is still about 90 million. And what the turnout is about 60. So they are still running it at a loss because they are running it as essential services. And you know, when there was the ease of lockdown for taxi drivers too, they also gave the same complaint. They used to convey 2 in the front, 3 at the back. Yeah. They were forced to take 1 at the front and 2 at the back. And they had to increase their transport fare from 100 naira to 150. Even at that, they were still a shortfall in what they were making. So economically, the COVID-19 is causing a lot of economic lockdown. There's this story you read about a former DG of the NTA.
Just before you get into that,
yes.
The story about COVID-19 and what the numbers are saying. I think that perhaps one of the most significant comments made by the chairman of the Presidential Task Force, who is the Secretary of the Government of the Federation, is that states are not enforcing COVID-19 regulations, which is why we are seeing what we are seeing with regard to it. And if there is, Nigerians will say, God forbid, assuming there were to be an explosion in the numbers, we will not be able to cope. that most state governments are not enforcing it. I saw some television footage of a nearby state here to the Federal Capital Territory, and there were traditional ceremony where they were conferring titles, no face mask, no social distancing, nothing. The governor himself had no face mask on. Everybody milling around, no face mask, nothing. And the state governments have also signed quarantine regulations, taking a bearing from what the president did.
And some of the state governors also attend burial ceremonies, elaborate burial ceremonies, and not just them, but other government officials at the state level. And that is not helping matters, with respect to what we're talking about. And until people at the upper echelon of governance, begin to let others know the reality on ground, then this may never be properly handled. That's a very big problem, especially at the state level where we have a majority of Nigerians residing.
Yeah, I was going to talk about what Dr. Tony Radia expressed about the new broadcasting code. The Minister of Information launched the 6th edition of the Nigerian Broadcasting Code. Since inception of the National Broadcasting Commission, the broadcasting code has been always outer directed. Stakeholders, industry holders gather and they look at the code, and collectively they now suggest ways of amending it. With this time around, with the minister saying that the president has approved certain amendments to be in the code, it is seen as outer directed, and there has been some resistance within the industry because broadcasting has to have what is called soft touch regulation. And the way they have gone about the code since inception in 1992 and at the 6th edition is that industry stakeholders, owners, everybody gather and they all agree on the issues because it is an industry code, you are part of it, and then it becomes a self-regulatory instrument. If you recall, just a couple of months ago, a station was shut down and it became a court case. Even in court, when the evidence was provided that this is a code that is collectively agreed with the industry, the complainer was asked, are you part of agreeing with the code? He said, yes. Then what are you complaining about? So when that element is not there, the natural tendency in the broadcast industry is that you have resistance. But there's no gainsaying the fact that hate speech is dangerous. Already, it is there in the code. Any speech that can lead to become incendiary is, in fact, the punishment for that is immediate shutdown. Hate speech can lead to social upheaval. It can even lead to war. It is very serious. And therefore, the initiative to be very stern with the punishment for it is welcome. But the mode for which it has been gone about needs a rethinking. The minister, by law, can give specific directive to the Director General, and he has to carry that out. But the day-to-day operations of a regulatory agency lies with the management and the Director General. That's the point Dr. Tony Radia is emphasizing.
Well, Kieran, I mean, we're all in the business. The idea of a regulator has come about on account of the deregulation of the industry. And you find it in many sectors. In telecoms, that's why you have the NCC. You also have a regulator in pension. You have a CBN, of course, itself is also a regulator. NDIC, of course, also plays a role in the sense of being a bulwark in the event of failure. Now, for the NBC, it's to say, look, you are the industry czar. You oversee the industry. And one of the key elements for ascertaining how well a regulator is playing is his independence. Its independence. Yes, the law specifies that the minister may from time to time issue specific directives. But where partisanship, as Dr. Tony Radia was alluding to, is feared, then that could be an issue. But directly in this matter, there is no partisanship. Let's be frank. There's no partisanship. As you have said, it has to do with ramping up the fine payable in the event of a breach of the code relating to provisions on hate speech. And we know how incendiary hate speech can be. But who ordinarily should have been the proper person to unveil the broadcast code or to have, in fact, worked out the broadcast code? You talked earlier about stakeholders. I mean, you have been at NBC. Stakeholders in the first instance. And then, of course, it is the NBC that itself will unveil the broadcast code. It's like saying the Minister of Finance, okay, the Minister of Finance doesn't supervise the CBN because CBN is autonomous on account of the Act setting it up. But how would it appear if the Minister of Finance or the President or some other person else were now to be issuing directives to banks with regard to their operation, let's say prudential guidelines and so on and so forth? I think these are some of the points that needed to be clarified, to say who, in other words, who should be seen to be directing the affairs of the broadcast regulator. But not necessarily that the fact that, look, everybody's against hate speech, and you say, oh, it's an attempt to gag the media. Why engage in hate speech in the first instance?
I think that your explanation is very apt, but when it comes to administration, I believe, quite frankly, that the minister has the responsibility, to make some speech, regarding to some decisions taken administratively, right? But when it comes to regulatory affairs, of course, MPC should be accountable. But in the sense of administration and information that is required for Nigerians to know, it can come from the minister, but I don't see anything wrong with that. But again, being partisan, like you rightly pointed out, there's no partisanship in what has transpired. But then it is important also to note that it's not going to be to the better interest of Nigeria for us to have partisanship, allowed, to meddle in when it comes to the issue of regulatory responsibilities of NBC, for instance. But what has transpired for me has nothing to do with politics. For me, it has to do with administration rather than politics. So I want to be on the side of the minister for, of course, telling Nigerians what government has decided on such issues concerning regulation and, of course, the hate speech and what have you.
No, hate speech is very grave. Even the United Nations says that hate speech should not be accorded freedom of expression.
That's right. Well, the other very worrisome, there are two worrisome issues on the front page, by the way. Al-Qaeda infiltrating Northwest. U.S. alerting Nigeria. I'm sure you also read that from
it's also
from
on
the Daily Trust.
The Nigerian Pilot. It's a very serious matter, Kingsley, and Bayo, because the operational methodology of these clandestine groups, can never be known unless you have the third eye, by applying intelligence to understand what's going on. And again, if you have the technological know-how in terms of having a radar or kind of a satellite monitoring their movements, because when U.S. released such an alarm, they must have done some homework in terms of intelligence and, of course, monitoring of the movements of these persons, ISWAP and Al-Qaeda. And they can have a very good network. They have a very good network. And then having local terrorist groups like Boko Haram and the rest of them in the West African sub-region, it is very easy. It will be very easy for them to have a good coordination, right? That can lead into them coming from other parts of the world, infiltrating and getting into West African sub-region. So it is a situation that our own local military intelligence should also look into properly within the West African sub-region.
I think you're right. It's very worrying. When we had our insurgency, it was only Boko Haram. As time went on, you now had the Islamic State of West Africa coming up, becoming an ally of ISWAP from Iraq and Iran. Now, the tendency is that they are having a link with the religious group in Mali, and they want to extend their activities across the West African sub-region. That is the alarm that the United States is raising. But the tendency is that it has already been addressed by the ECOWAS. The ECOWAS, at their last meeting, it's a security meeting, they also expressed serious concern about the link with the security and terrorist group within the West African sub-region. So I think the alarm from the United States is timely, and it means that more efforts have to be geared, and our borders particularly will need more vigilance.
This writer here, basically, as Boko Haram reveals its presence in Niger State via video. How authentic is that information?
Well, the report was out there yesterday with social media. They showed them in a prayer session during this last Eid celebration. And then at least two of them were said to have put on uniforms, that's of military fatigue, and that of a police officer. Presumably, they said those were uniforms they had snatched from the backs of officers who were felled. And they also spoke in Hausa and Fulfulde and English, claiming that they were already embedded in Niger. Well, I believe that that's a matter for the security and intelligence agencies to work out. But Bayo and Kyria, when we talk about this infiltration, let's just back up a bit. If you recall, when banditry was starting in the northwest,
yes.
The presumption was that there was no drift from the northeast, Boko Haram, to the northwest. And one of the initial steps taken by the government was to outlaw illegal mining or mining activities in Zamfara, if you recall.
Yes.
And they said because those were the persons who were fueling it. All right, I don't think that mining activity, illegal mining or artisanal mining has resumed in Zamfara. But all of a sudden, you now started seeing what was happening in Kaduna, started seeing what was happening in Katsina, and of course in other parts of the northwest. Who are these elements? And where are they coming from? Our borders remain shut. Where are they coming from? You have this narrow sliver of land between Nigeria, Benin Republic, Burkina Faso. What is our control over that particular spot?
And these groups are in their hundreds.
Yes.
They're in their hundreds
That's right.
with the motorbikes.
The challenge in the northwest was that when pressure was put on the bandits in Zamfara, the tendency was that they got dispersed and then they spread into Katsina, Sokoto, Kebbi. And so with the initiative of the security forces, particularly the Air Force is having considerable impact, and they are now being supported by the ground soldiers. The police also has mobilized their own ground troops, and they are taking the war now, as they say, to the bandits where they are.
Are these bandits, Kyria, are these bandits per se? Because part of the modus operandi of Boko Haram will be to behave like bandits. In the early stages, they were raiding banks, getting money, raiding shops and farms to get food stuff. And then, of course, they started expanding and say, look, they want to now capture territory, and they run their own illegal administration. So those whom we refer to as bandits in the northwest, are they real bandits, or they are the foot soldiers of these elements who are seeking to expand their influence across West Africa on the basis of Al-Qaeda?
Well, it's really a dicey situation the way it is now, and of course, as you said, the security agencies, should of course, ramp up the action towards fighting this, because it's already becoming a security pandemic, if you ask me. All right, editorials: fixing Third Mainland Bridge. That's a commentary from the Nation newspaper. Henceforth, its maintenance should be routine. Bayo.
You have some of the essence of the editorial. You recall that the Third Mainland Bridge was built in 1990, and until now, this is
it was completed in 1991 by General Babangida's administration. But it was started by Shagari.
Yes, but since its inception, this is the first time it's getting a comprehensive overhaul by way of repair and maintenance. What the editorial is saying that we don't have to wait since 1991 till now before we has given it that critical one. And editorial is advising that the maintenance on it should be routine, so that the bridge will not depreciate to the extent that they have to shut it down and cause inconveniences. You can imagine that on a daily basis you have traffic population of between 3,000 to 4,000. On weekends between 6,000 and 9,000. And now that it's going to be shut between now and January, it's going to cause a lot of serious inconveniences. And that's why the editorial is happening on the fact that the routine should be periodic, and by that way it will save people a lot of costs.
But first of all, we need to appreciate the current administration, for taking up that responsibility of doing a comprehensive, like you say, it's for the first time since it was constructed, a comprehensive approach to its maintenance. It has not happened, because if it had happened between 1991 and now, there wouldn't have any reason, for this shutdown and what have you. The same thing could be said about the second Niger Bridge, which of course Shagari also planned. Right, it never took off and so on, and other, subsequent administrations promised to do that. But today, the current administration is on it.
It's gradually coming up from the banks of the River Niger. But that of the third Lagos Bridge, the alarm had been on for about 2 years now. The drivers, the persons using the road, have always raised the alarm that they find that the bridge seems to be quivering. And on 2 occasions, engineers from the Federal Ministry of War had gone there and said it is the nature of the bridge, and sometimes it vibrates because of the gap within it. But the good thing is that this time around, they are taking care of the huge gaps that were coming in between the births of the
All right,
bridge.
maybe that would be something that we'll look at another day. One is that this is not actually the first time that they're having a comprehensive work, doing comprehensive work on it. Some years ago, probably about 10 years or so ago, the bridge was also closed in similar fashion in Lagos, and I think at some other point, some
But
years
what was the
ago.
extent of job done there? That's the most
Well,
important
it is not on the entire stretch of the bridge. It's at the junction or points that joints that they call. Yes, I mean there's some engineering terminology that they use for that. But why didn't you start the work during the lockdown? Prior to it, I would like to thank you for being around.
Thank you too.
We'll see you again tomorrow. All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we shall be listening to the experiences of persons who have suffered from COVID-19 and have survived.
Now, we thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria. And it's about time to, of course, go into the interview segment. But before that, let's have excerpts put together by Victor Azu, that's on persons who have suffered and survived COVID-19.
I didn't have headache, but I had fever. I had nausea. I had I lost appetite. For the first 3-4 days, I was in a terrible shape, honestly. And because I had some comorbidity, I had already had some time ago, about 2 years ago or so, a quadruple bypass. So the health workers were worried about my heart condition, and what they're trying to do is to ensure that I don't have any major issue with the heart. So it is like we have to treat the fever, treat the little bit of cough that is there, and then ensure that there is no clot in the system to stop the heart from functioning. And for 3 days or 4 days, almost 4 days, I was in that condition, and it was not a very good condition for me, honestly, because the one that I had was symptomatic type. But luckily, by the grace of God, after about the 5th day, I wasn't eating anything because I don't have any appetite. It's just drugs, injections. So what essentially the health workers are doing is try to treat the symptoms, because like everybody knows, there is no medicine for coronavirus. So what they try to do is to treat the symptoms, and they have been able to do that successfully within those 3-4 days that the disease was with me. And then after about the 4th, 5th day, it started to subside. And that was the time that I really started to feel that, okay, maybe I'm going to survive. And then after the 5th, 6th, 7th day, I was a little bit okay, and my test was taken around the 10th. The 10th day after the first attack, and the result came out negative.
For 4 days, 5 days, as one of the colleagues was saying, I was bedridden, completely bedridden. I couldn't move. And I was praying, lying down. And somehow I received several liters of intravenous fluid, many medications, the anti-HIV medications, the hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, zinc, and for days, oxygen also through nasal prongs, because my oxygen also was low, in addition to the electrolytes that was also not normal. So at that time, the level of weakness was really, really marked. In the first month, I continued to have cough, despite the fact that I tested negative. But subsequently, over the past few weeks, I've been cough-free. I don't have any residual symptom. So generally, we continue with the message that social distancing is crucially important. Use of face masks is non-negotiable, and use of hand sanitizers is also crucially important.
I had malaria, my own case, and when our governors were to meet in the neck of my party, they called me, and it was even my brother governor, Jide Sanwo-Olu, that called and said, oh, when are you coming? I said, look, I'm having malaria. No, I don't think I'm leaving my bed. I want to rest. I won't be able to come for the next meeting. And after I said that, he just retorted and said, after the malaria, why don't you take a test? Because this at times show up like malaria. I said, are you sure? He said, yes. Because usually, if I know how when I have malaria, I know the symptom in me, and subject myself to test. They took my blood sample. I have malaria plus. I thought it was just malaria. So when he gave that advice, after I completed the treatment for malaria, I went ahead to take the test. When the test came back and said I was positive, I was shocked, but it's all right. Positive, asymptomatic. I didn't. I still smell. I still taste. I was strong. I said, well, fair enough. He says I was positive. Then I made an announcement that, look, yes, I'm going to now go ahead and get myself isolated, and I'll be managed in the house. And I went ahead and went through all the routines of so many drugs that were brought after. Because before then, I was also taking so many of those, what I would call like zinc. And even before then, I started drinking this black seed oil. So I was already on. So I have some load of. I'm too sure of what I would call drugs that I was already taking. So I had to add a particular drug that was recommended by a doctor. This is what we use here for the treatment in Ondo State, and that is an antiviral drug that is Alluvia. So it was added, and I took that for over 7 days or so, and the test was again carried out, and it came out negative.
The isolation center is a place of peace, and the personnel are professional, compassionate, and they are even fed and with nice meals. So that fear of your right being taken away from you and all that, it doesn't arise.
All right, thank you very much, Victor Azu, for the excerpts from our conversation last week with persons who had coronavirus, and congratulations to them. They all survived and they are thriving. So this week we again returned to discuss the issue, but of course taking a bearing from survivors. Here with us in the studio this morning, we would like to welcome a security consultant, Mr. Yomi Koka, a COVID-19 survivor. Mr. Koka, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
It's my pleasure.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios is Dr. John Tor Agbedie. He's an integrative medicine neurotoxicologist and Secretary General of Integrative Medicine West Africa. He's not had coronavirus, but he will give us some medical perspectives to this issue. Dr. John, delight to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure, Kingsley. Thank you.
All right, and joining us via Zoom is Professor Emiola Olabale Olaopa. I hope I got that correctly. He's the immediate past provost of College of Medicine, University of Ibadan. It's also a pleasure to have you, Professor Olaopa, to the program.
It's a pleasure to be on the program.
All right, Prof, let's begin with you, Kirian. By the way, we are expecting some other guests to join us also via Skype.
Yes.
Once the connections in their locations are sorted out by our engineers. Professor Olakpa, let's begin with you. Congratulations. We understand you had COVID-19 and you survived. Tell us your story.
Well, my story briefly is that we were at a meeting, an official meeting, and it later turned out that one of the participants was COVID-19 positive. Because we had a laboratory in our center, we then went and tested those of us who were at the meeting, and it turned out we were positive too. So 3 other members were positive, myself, the chief medical director, and my deputy provost. However, we went ahead and did some antibody tests that suggested that we may actually have been exposed, at least I may actually have been exposed to the disease before that particular incident, which suggests that that may have just been a second exposure. That's what happened.
Prof, explain that to us. I mean, you're now talking about double exposure, first exposure and then second exposure. At the time you went for the test, immediately after the meeting you spoke about, were you asymptomatic or you already started developing some symptoms?
No, I was asymptomatic throughout. What it is that it's becoming clear to us, at least at the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan, where we've undertaken some what is called seroprevalence tests, some surveillance tests using antibodies, aside from just the popular COVID-19 tests. It's clear that there are some exposure, or that quite a number of people have been exposed to the disease and are asymptomatic. So it's only when you test them, and if you catch them at the right time, they will test positive. We went ahead and did what we call antibody tests, which are blood tests that let you know whether people who are asymptomatic have been exposed to the disease. And there are two types. There's the one that the antibody that occurs from prolonged exposure before, or one that occurs to an exposure that is recent. I had both, which confirmed I had previously been exposed and I was now re-exposed. But since I was asymptomatic, it shows that to some extent, there was some body reaction to it that prevented me from becoming sick.
All right, we're certainly going to come back to you for further explanations because you are a professional, and from your explanation, it does appear that there are many aspects of this COVID-19 that are yet to be properly understood and properly dissected. All right, let's return to Abuja here where we have Mr. Oluyomi David Koka. Let's also hear from you what your experience was like.
Mine was, I think sometime in June, I fell sick. I was feeling a bit feverish. So I decided to go do the routine malaria and typhoid test. I did the test and it came back. There was no malaria, there was no typhoid. So I was wondering what was going on. So I spoke to a friend of mine who said, better go do the COVID test. I now called the NCDC number, and someone asked me to come to the ICC, International Conference Center, where they had the lab. So I went there. They took my sample. But while they took my sample, I wasn't really feeling fine. Every evening was fever and all that. So I was at home. He advised me to isolate. I was at home. I didn't go anywhere. So I think that night, the result was not out after about 3 days, which, I mean, is a bit of a problem. So I had to go to National Hospital where I was admitted, and they had to call them, keep calling them, and they got my result that it was positive. And at that point, a lot of things was going through my mind. I was like, whoa, am I going to die? Am I going to live? You know, the information out there wasn't that much. You didn't know quite a lot about it. So, but a lot was done while I was there. You know, the doctors, the nurses, they did their best in, you know, trying to reduce the viral load that was in my system. And eventually I got out and my second result was negative. And since then I've been okay.
How long did you stay at the hospital?
I was there for about 16 days. 16
days. Yes. When you say you felt sick, how sick were you, and what were the symptoms of that sickness?
Yeah, I had fever. My temperature was very high. I think it was, at one point it was about 38.5. I couldn't feel my joints, but I could smell and I could taste. So initially, for me, it wasn't COVID, because the information out there was that if you can't smell, if you have difficulty in breathing and all that, that's when you have COVID. But I could do all those things, so I was like, well, maybe it's not COVID, maybe it's just normal malaria we treat. And actually, I started treating malaria irrespective of the result not coming out that I had malaria. I started treating malaria, but I wasn't getting better while waiting for the result. So eventually I had to go to the hospital and check myself in.
All right, Dr. John Tor Abwidie, you've listened to the two guests. And a short while ago, before we went on air, we were having a conversation on the biological behavior of this COVID-19. And he said, look, that a lot has been learned lately, about the virus. And that has given a kind of advantage to the medical practitioners to now understand how to begin the treatment in the first instance. So let us know some of those, new knowledge that has emerged as a result of, the continuous research, on this very virus in question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen. You see, COVID-19 came to us unexpectedly. Nobody ever had, the protocol of managing, the disease. The scientific knowledge was very much, rare. But over time, with very intensive research, we've come to understand better how this virus actually works, and we're still understanding. Unlike things that you are used to, like if you went today and then bought, a television set, you are given a manual. You know everything about it, how to operate it. But COVID-19 came without a manual. It came without what we call material safety, sheet, that is MSD, that you have for every chemical. So, but now we've come to understand that there are two main phases of the disease. You have what you call the virologic phase of the disease, and you have the immunologic phase of the disease. What do I mean by virologic phase of the disease? Now, take it this way. You are a healthy person before being infected with the virus. Now, when the virus comes into the body, the virus would undergo replication, that is multiplication. So that's why we say this is the viral phase of the disease. The virus is actually multiplying in the body until it multiplies and attains a certain, volume or, numbers. That is where you start having, clinical symptoms. Based on that, you have what you call the asymptomatic. And if I'm to explain on this, asymptomatic means that you've not started developing, the symptoms of the disease. Basically, that's what means is that just like it happened to him, the virus he got infected with the virus, then the virus had not multiplied enough, had not replicated enough. So for him to start experiencing, the disease or the symptoms. Then after this phase, and usually this phase is very short. It just takes about 4 to 7 days on the average basis. Then after that, because when you get the virus phase, the virus has, affinity for the upper respiratory tract, that is the larynx, and the pharynx, that is the upper respiratory tract, because this is the area that has what we call the AC2 receptors for the attachment of the virus. Now, once the virus attaches to this, then it starts moving down. It stays in the upper respiratory tract for about 4 to 7 days. Now, it now moves down to the lungs. Once it is in the lungs, then the virus the immune system overreacts. And that's what you hear. You hear terms like the cytokine phase and then the things like that. It's just an overreaction of the immune system. It gets overblown. Then at that phase, you are at the immunologic phase of the disease. Consequently, having explained these two phases, in the viral phase of the disease, what you should be doing is to do anything that will slow down the viral replication. And this is why some of these drugs that should be used, things you mentioned earlier like zinc. I'm not going to mention chloroquine since it is very controversial, but if you go into literature, chloroquine has been shown to reduce viral replication. This is over years. But now that it has become kind of political and otherwise, I'm not going to talk about it, and I'm here not to make any prescription, but it's for the purposes of education. Zinc, that you also talk about. Yes, zinc too. Zinc actually, it takes chloroquine also as an ionophore. That is, it facilitates the intake of zinc into the cell. so that the environment becomes more alkaline. And once it becomes more alkaline, once you start from, you see, the virus has what you call spikes, protein spikes. Those are the spikes that attaches on the surface. If the pH is not right, those spikes cannot attach. And this is where some of these products actually, help. If it prevents the attachment of, the virus will not get into the body. Now, after the virologic phase of the disease, then when you go to immunologic phase of the disease, I've already said that you have exacerbated inflammation. What should be your focus at this stage? This is where you use anti-inflammatory agents because the inflammation has overblown. So you try to dampen it. And what do? Scientifically or basic science tells me that some of these anti-inflammatory like metylprednisolone or dexamethasone, can really help. So with this understanding now, we've gained a better understanding that at this phase, this is it. And clinically, you have a treatment that should be focused on prophylaxis, that is the prevention. This is to boost your immune system so that even when the virus gets into you, I can see this young man, he looks healthy, and I'm not making any assumptions or making a diagnosis here. But looking at somebody like this, you can see that, yeah, he will be able to withstand, disease because he looks really, healthy. So this is what we are now focusing on in the pre-asymptomatic and asymptomatic. Then you have early form of the disease, then you have the mild form of the disease, you have the severe form of the disease, then you have the intensive care unit. Each of these stages should be treated differently. But when the disease came on to us, we were mixing up things. But I think a lot has been sorted out now.
All right, Dr. John, we will return to you to further explain some of the aspects that you've already touched on. I want us to return to Professor Olapade Olaupa, who is immediate past provost of the College of Medicine at UI. Prof, you talked about being asymptomatic is one expression that we have heard over time, and Dr. John Toabidi has also explained that the asymptomatic phase is probably akin to what it refers to as a virologic phase. If a person is asymptomatic, it means you are not showing any symptoms. So how then do you know that you have the virus? What would then make you to go and do a test if you are not showing any symptoms?
Well, that is part of the problems with the disease or any disease. When you have what is called an epidemic or a pandemic, what we know is that a majority of people who have the disease actually will show no symptoms. And these are the people who silently catch the disease and silently spread the disease, such that the community then develops what is known as herd immunity, i.e. baseline immunity. The sort of immunity we have with malaria that makes it that we all have malaria without everybody dying, while somebody who comes from an area where there is no malaria, like a white man from Norway, if he's exposed to malaria, he has the severe form of malaria and can die. So the asymptomatic people who just have the disease without showing any symptoms normally do not go and test unless there's a screening project going on. And this is one of the things that in the early phase of the disease, the NCDC was emphasizing because we had limited number of test kits. Therefore, we couldn't be testing everybody. It was important for us to test people who had symptoms of the disease, who showed signs of that could indicate they had the disease, so that we could test those ones and then find out if or not they had the disease. Since not everybody who has what we think are symptoms actually has COVID. I'm sure you would have come across several newspaper reports of people who had fever and were left untreated. Some of them unfortunately died, and at post-mortem were found not to have the disease. So we cannot go away from asymptomatic people, but at the same time, it's a question of how widely available the tests are. In a country that doesn't have so many tests, then it is difficult to just test everybody, since you don't know who has the disease and who doesn't. The second phase of that is what I mentioned as regards the testing the antibodies, because since they haven't shown the disease, the likelihood is that they may or may not have been exposed. It is those antibody tests that will let us know those who are asymptomatic and have previously been exposed to the disease, and those who are asymptomatic because they have not been exposed to the disease. There are two different kinds of asymptomatic people, some with the disease and others without the disease. And we need to be clear whether or not they have the disease. That only comes with testing.
Well, let me ask you this, Prof. If somebody is asymptomatic, perhaps for a particular period of time, is there a period of time that being asymptomatic can lapse? That is to say, assuming someone who caught the virus has continued to become asymptomatic for about a month, 2 or 3 months, as case may be, what will be the resultant effect?
Well, the truth of the matter is that the COVID-19 is a new disease. And with any new disease, we really do not know what its biological cause is. Some people will catch the disease, become infected, they will be asymptomatic and will remain asymptomatic, just like I. Some people will become infected, will be asymptomatic for a few days, and then if they do not have baseline immunity or their body cannot cope with it, or they have a high viral load from whatever reason, they will progress to having symptoms. The problem epidemiologists have is that it is impossible to tell who is going to remain asymptomatic and who will not be, who will progress and become symptomatic. Just like they have the problem of when you say somebody is asymptomatic, is he asymptomatic because he has not been exposed to the disease, or he's asymptomatic because tested? Both of the RT-PCR, that is the normal COVID-19 test we all know, and the antibody, so you can separate these two. The problem is it costs a lot of money. And if you are not making the kits in your country, it becomes even not just the money, but then the availability of the kits becomes an issue. And that's why a country like South Africa that makes the kit is testing far more widely than Nigeria, where we have to import the kits.
I'm just wondering, Prof, I still would like to stay with you before we bring in one of the guests who is with us, who will be with us via Skype. Prof, let's clarify this, assuming there's any clarity that can be gained from the limited or growing understanding of the biology of the virus. Now, it is said that asymptomatic persons, or those who have symptoms, or those who have been tested and found to have the virus, should self-isolate if you are asymptomatic. Does self-isolation without any treatment lead to recovery? That's one. I'm asking this question because if a person is asymptomatic, the presumption is that you are not showing any symptoms. And experts have also said that what you need to treat, because there's no cure for corona or there is no vaccine, what you need to treat will be the symptoms. So if a person is asymptomatic, what then are you treating? And why then should the person be in self-isolation?
Well, I'm glad you are sharing part of our dilemma with us. That is why it's called a pandemic. It affects everybody. The truth of the matter is, for now, we are uncertain about the cause of COVID-19. So the asymptomatic people, yes, we have a dilemma. Are they asymptomatic and not capable of being infectious, i.e. they are not affecting other people? Or are they asymptomatic and silently spreading the disease? Perhaps to complicate the matter a little more, you really cannot stop the disease from spreading. The question is, how do you ensure that it spreads at a rate that allows the community to develop widespread immunity? That is why the WHO was arguing against border closures, lockdowns, and all that, because they knew that whatever you did, the disease would spread. But the question is this: if it spreads, you do not know who is going to become symptomatic and indeed die. So you had really tried a bit of guesswork. So when I was asymptomatic, I self-isolated. At the time I was asymptomatic, there was nobody else in my house that had it. I had elderly people in the house who I had to protect. We had to protect people who had underlying diseases, who are much more vulnerable. So you want to, at the early phase of the disease, the pandemic, isolate everybody that is positive. You don't know what is going on. But we know that there are people in the community who are asymptomatic and are in the community spreading the disease because they have not been tested. So it's not as if we can guarantee that we've tested and identified all asymptomatic people who are positive and then self-isolate all those people. No, you can't. You are just trying to make sure that the rate of infection within the community is at a rate that the health system can cope with, whilst praying that the immunity within the community, which is called herd immunity, develops at a pace that will prevent too many people from coming down with the severe type of the illness. There is no disease that doesn't have a mild form. If everybody is just mildly sick, that's okay. It is the fact that it can be severely, it can affect some people severely and cause death that worries us. And the fact that we do not know who that will happen in. Now we're clearer. The elderly, people with severe hypertension, severe diabetes, people who are recovering from cancer or who are on cancer drugs, and anybody else whose immunity is affected, you really need to be careful with them with COVID-19. That's what are areas that were unclear to us at the beginning that are becoming clearer, and we're adjusting the treatment modalities as we go along.
Yeah, Prof, that's actually well explained, but I'd like to go further to ask questions concerning this asymptomatic nature of some persons, who may have caught coronavirus. We've heard also from some professionals that in some cases, perhaps few cases, you could have someone who is asymptomatic and who may never develop symptoms, and some of them may actually, the virus may actually leave their system, without being attended to medically. I don't know how true that is. If you're in your studies, whether you're able to come across such explanation to say, look, that if you're asymptomatic for a very long time, it does appear that you have an uncompromised immune system that could, of course, let the virus out of the system without any form of formal medication.
Well, that has to be said to be what we would call anecdotally. That is, we don't have clear-cut scientific evidence. The majority of cases, and you just have to look at the figures the NCDC is putting out. You see that they have a lot of people that they say they tested, and only so many, a proportion of them are positive. Of those that are positive, only so a proportion of them are in isolation. Of those that are in isolation, only so many of them die. That shows that there is a gradation. And as there is a gradation, you are unable to say categorically what is going to happen as the disease progresses. The problem is you cannot give one size fits all. That would be very dangerous. And that is why people, the doctors are being careful. We do not want to cause a panic, but at the same time, we cannot tell you, oh, if you are asymptomatic, then you are not going to have any problems. Please go away and look after yourself. No. All the while I was unwell, I was positive. I actually kept watching to make sure I didn't develop symptoms. However, let me make a further claim. It is clear to us that there may have been an earlier introduction of the COVID-19 into the country before it became an international issue. That has been found even in the foreign countries. Now in America, they're testing their samples and finding out that it could have actually been brought into the country as early as September. On a private chat platform we are in, at least 4 or 5 of us can remember that around January, we all had what we thought was a nasty cold and a nasty cough that just would not go. We individually looked after ourselves. I mean, I remember being very concerned about this cough. I had to be going around with cough mixture in my bag. But I was sick, I was feeling unwell, I was feeling feverish, but I just did the normal things and I thought it was a nasty cough, and I thought nothing of it. Until 3-4 months later, when this COVID-19 thing came in, and then we tested. Now, when we did my antibody test, and it was clear that I had had previous exposure prior to that particular meeting where somebody who we could now identify had COVID-19. The question now came in as a scientist: is it possible that that cough I had in January that I thought was just an unusual and a nasty cough, could that have been it? It may not have been COVID, but was it something similar to it? Is that why I then had enough antibodies to fight COVID? This is why we need more research. It is not a new disease is not something that you just pick 1 or 2 or 3 cases and use them as the norm. No, we really need to have intense research efforts. We need to go back in to look at previous blood samples that have been stored from people who had similar symptoms in the past and now retest them. This is what the institutions like mine, biomedical research institutions, should be funded to do, so we can have a lot more data to talk about rather than the anecdotal evidence we have now and the reactions. Of course, research is continuous, and of course, treatment is continuous. So as we're going along, we're doing research. But for this particular type of illnesses, it is always necessary to go back into the archives, go back into our blood samples, go back into our medical records, and let us try and see exactly what is going on and piece it together. Who knows? We might even discover that we have a completely different strain of COVID-19 in Nigeria. We don't know that yet. There's no doubt that the virus mutates, but we need to know from both sides, community, from the research institutions, and definitely from the hospitals, what the pattern of the disease is, so we can better inform the public and therefore better treat the patients and prevent the pandemic from becoming more of a problem.
All right, Professor Olakpade, thank you very much. We're going to have to step you down in the meantime, but we'll return to you later on in the course of the conversation. But let's come back here to our Abuja studios. Yomi Koka, who is a survivor. I mean, you told us you spent a little over 2 weeks at the National Hospital. What was your experience like, and when did you begin to feel better? I'm not going to ask why did you stay that long. I mean, because it looks like the normal duration on the average for people to recover once they get hit by coronavirus. What was your experience?
Well, I remember when I came in, I could hardly help myself walk. You know, I was wheeled into one of the wards, and that night they did, they checked the level of oxygen. I think it's called saturation. Yes, and it was a bit low, and so I was on oxygen for like 2-3 days. Within that period, I could really not help myself do anything apart from go to the bathroom and back. You know, I couldn't eat. I was, and I had to take the drug. So it was constant, just force yourself to see if you can put something in your system so that the drugs can start working. I think that took about 4 or 5 days. Thereafter, I was off oxygen, and a lot of kudos to the nurse, because they were always coming around, and the doctors coming around to check, to encourage you and tell you that you'll be fine, you know, just go through the regime with us and everything will be okay. And that's how it went for like 4 or 5 days. And I was relatively okay by the 8th, 9th day. But because I think there's a regime they have for the treatment, which takes that period of time. And, you know, they come to check again to see if you're now negative. But if you still return positive, you know, they'll still ask you to stay, you know, take the drugs again for some days and that. So that was what really happened.
Were you alone?
No, there are a couple of other people in the ward, and funny enough, we became friends. You know, in that situation, we're encouraging each other, you know, and of course, to say some persons came in and, you know, died, but I mean, it was
Can
a
we share
process.
some of the bodily feelings that you had in terms of pains, back pains, headache, dizziness,
Yeah,
and other things? Do you have all of that?
Then, when I came in, all that were part of the problem, and I could remember that I couldn't sleep at night. I was always scared when it's nighttime from around 6, 7. I'm like, will I make it till the morning? The first few days.
No, you were having the anxiety.
Yeah, and the anxiety was high. But like I said, the medical practitioners, I really need to thank them, because they come around, they assure you that you're fine, just take your drugs. A lot of people have left here, you live here, don't worry, and all that. So, it helped calm a lot of us down. And I think most of the people that actually passed they came in really bad. Mm-hmm. They came in really, really bad.
Okay.
Someone comes in, and from the first day the person gets in there, you could see that he had difficulty in breathing. Mm-hmm. He could not take everything has to be fluid into his system and all that. So, and I think that's one of the problem again, because you see the issue of the stigma. A lot of people stay back home and don't want to seek treatment because what will people say? And by the time they now realize that it is not the function of what people say, but how you treat yourself and how you recover.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yomi. Let's bring in again Dr. John Togbidie. A number of points are on the table. Your medical colleague, Professor Emiola, has raised a number of issues with regard to the behavior. And then just now, Koka is talking about presenting late with the virus. And earlier, you were talking about the virologic stage of the virus when it's in the upper respiratory tract. How should a person behave? Does a person feel sick when the disease is at a virologic stage? That's to say, in the first 4 or 7 days when it is in the upper respiratory tract. If you don't fall sick, how can you present?
Well, Kingsley, I'm going to tell you something. This is to say that health is a lifetime investment. We don't have to wait until we're sick or COVID-19 comes before we start looking after our health. There's what we call the annual wellness checks. Most people, or all of us, should have our personal doctors that we check, especially as we advance in age. It's very important. Like any other disease, COVID-19, if you catch it early, at the early stage of the disease, that's why you have early, mild, and severe. It has been classified. You will walk over it, especially when your immune system. Take note. All that we're talking about vaccines and all this, what does the vaccine do in the body? It's basically to boost your immune system. I mean, to help. Actually, the word boost, it shouldn't be there. We don't boost the immune system. We actually immunomodulate so that it is in the right stage. Because what the virus is doing in the lungs is trying to, the immune system is boosted. That's why you have cytokine storms. So this is to say we should really check ourselves annually. Then lifestyle is really very important. Make sure you eat very well. Diet, nutrition is the key factor that drives our immune system. You make sure that you have a balanced diet. Then as you age, honestly, the immune system naturally wanes away, just like any other thing in life. Just like your car. When you bought it, new car, you can afford not to service it for maybe a month. But over the years, you see, you have to be on regular maintenance of servicing, your car. So our bodies must be serviced along the line. Let me interject here. We talk about taking things that will help with our immune system. Yes, there is what I call the normal way of life where you can depend on some of these food items. But as we age on and the immune system wanes out, and especially in the face and challenge of a disease like this, you have to upgrade the amount of some of these supplements that are actually immunocomplementary that you take is very important. That's why I tell people, yeah, it is good. As a normal person, yeah, I can depend on my fruits and depend on my this and this. But as the time goes on, you have to look at this, supplement. Even in disease state, we go further. Rather than oral dosing, what we do at our center, even when you come down, you are completely low on some of these micronutrients, we give it to you injectable in high doses so that it can boost you up and take you to that plateau, and then you can be maintained. So overall, the message is that we should invest in our health. Health is something that you don't just take, you don't take care of it until it is late, because it will cost you more.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering, this aspect of the immune system. Look, doctor, you are saying do your annual wellness check, which is like your comprehensive medical exam.
Exactly.
Now, this is, we're in August 2020. From what Professor Lakpa was saying, and indeed from what we have also read as to the likely earliest arrival of COVID-19, say in the US, they are tracing it back now to a period even well before the fall, which is autumn in their environments. If a person did annual wellness check in August last year, there will be no symptom of coronavirus. And here we are. And now everybody's scrambling to say, look, fortify yourself. So I get the point that do your annual wellness check. But the question is, at that asymptomatic stage, where there are no symptoms, is it just mere testing that will reveal it? And the testing is not commonly available. What then do we do in our environment?
Well, you see, the truth, just like, Professor Oladipe said, it comes to a point where you have to take care of yourself. This is to say, okay, you were having regular checks, you having the right lifestyle, your immune system was up and then running. I am not saying that COVID-19 will not get to you. Even if COVID-19 gets to you and you are immunocompetent, you are able to handle it better. I think one of your, the advice that NTA actually shows, it says that, boost your immune system so that when you come down with the disease, your immune system can, your body can handle it, better. So if you are doing this, that's why I say it's a long-time investment. I'm not saying that just in the last few months you start making this. It should be a lifestyle investment. And somebody like above, 40, and as you also mentioned rightly, some of these people that have comorbidities, that are pre-existing conditions, they are the ones that succumb more so easily. But if you had prevented that comorbidity that is now underlined and superimposed by COVID-19, you would not be in that mess.
So what you're saying in effect is that persons who are above 40 should be on any kind of multivitamins or any immune. Well, it says it's not going to be called boosting, but of course, in our own as ordinary Nigerians, we call it boosting of the immune. Is that what you're saying? That the persons above 40 should be on a kind of multivitamins to boost the immune system? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but it takes more than just multivitamins to boost your immune system, if we would use that word. Because as I'm saying, that I'll continue to emphasize on this message. Health is a lifetime investment.
Okay.
That's even before you got to 40. You should be living a good lifestyle. You must be having enough sleep. You must be eating very well. You must be taking enough water. You must be exercising.
A great deal of it. Okay, right now,
yes.
We are now being connected with Mohammed Babandede. Mohammed Babandede via Skype is the Controller General of Nigerian Immigration Service. He's also a survivor of COVID-19. Controller General, good morning and welcome to the program. Of course, I hope you've had the opportunity of listening to the conversation even when you are not on air with us. if you actually had other contributors to the program, we would like to also share, your experience, as someone who has survived the COVID-19.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join this discussion. What is important, survival is not by strategy and it's not by style. You will try your best as a person, but survival is on the side of God. I tried my best and God accepted that I survived. But let me tell you the experience. I came back from London on the 22nd of March, just when the airport was about to close. And for information, I came with my wife. We traveled with my wife. We were together all through as husband and wife. When I returned, I made sure I don't go close to my office and to my supporting staff. Because that's the rule of Nigeria, that when you return at that period, you need to go for self-isolation. That's what I did with my wife. So with our family, when we arrive, we say, sorry, we can't greet, we can't come near you, we'll be in isolation. We went to an isolation for good 1 week. Then I decided to have a test. Actually, my wife was surprised. Why are you calling NCTC? I just wanted to have a test. So they came and did a test. My wife came out negative. I came out positive. After the test on 28, I continued and did another test after 1 week. I still tested positive according to NCTC. What I did was, I was very strong. So I dropped myself to Gwagwalada Isolation Center and went and stayed as an ordinary Nigerian. Nobody knew, just put my name, Mohammed Baba. I stayed there. After 5 days, I tested negative twice. Remember our time, we used to test negative twice. But my luck is that I only had 2 experiences in COVID. Loss of taste and loss of smell. In Gwagwalada, after 2 days, they made a test for me for malaria and they found I was malaria positive. I think that's what I can say. The only thing I had experience with the COVID-19 is the fear itself and then loss of taste and smell. Later, I was found to be malaria positive. That's all. But to God be the glory. The strategy is that I have not infected anybody. Usually, the disease is imported. Unfortunately, it has spread. But I have not imparted on any of my mates, my household, my family. Nobody was infected. But to that, to God be the glory.
Let me just add this question to you. From what you have explained, it does appear that after you tested positive, and of course had a test on malaria, and you came out malaria positive, you just perhaps was treated malaria, and after which you became negative. Is that what you inferred?
I don't want to share the type of medication government gave me because for me, it's not good as a government official to share because it will affect other people. People will start taking the medicine, which is very bad. I was given medication by NCDC. But during the process of medication of COVID-19, when I went to Gwagwalada, I felt I had malaria. And they did a test for malaria. I tested positive malaria. What I realized the cause of the malaria was that when I was doing self-isolation at home, I was a victim of social media, which says, COVID doesn't like air conditioning. That you should not put air conditioning. You should not do this. So I actually didn't put air conditioning in my room. I opened the window, so malaria bite me. That could have been the cause of the malaria, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to talk about the medication, but in addition to the medication given to me by NCTC, I was given medication for malaria because I tested positive malaria in the process of being treated.
Well, Comptroller General, you talked about some anxiety when you went to the isolation center on your own. What were those anxieties you had? And following your experience at the center, isolation center or treatment center, were those anxieties justified?
You see, the greatest anxiety is with my family. After staying for almost 2 weeks, I continued to test positive. The anxiety was enormous. That forced me to release a video in the social media because the people feel that when you have COVID-19, you are dead or you have ventilator. So the anxiety is not only on me, on my family, on my relation, on my loved ones across the country. There were a lot of prayers session in churches and mosques for me, and I've seen a lot of those clips. The anxiety was enormous. But internally in me, I knew I was not sick. I'm just have to tell you this. I was not feeling anything except loss of smell and taste. But I was strong. I was doing 6,000 steps in my small room in Gwagwalada. I had the Samsung watch, which takes my steps. My age limit says 6,000 steps. And I do that steps every day. So the anxiety was less. The anxiety was more from my loved ones than myself. But I had the feeling strongly that I would recover.
I don't know. Well, you may have to reveal some more as to what the experience is at Gwagwalada. Always on Good Morning Nigeria, we've had Dr. Vivian join us to tell us how they are handling patients. Somebody's going to ask, is there a treatment center like a stadium where you can take 6,000 steps, or you have so much space around there? What generally was the condition of the treatment center? I don't want to refer to it as an isolation center. Is it conducive or is it scary? I mean, you are a paramilitary officer. Some persons have the impression that a treatment center or the so-called isolation center is a form of imprisonment.
Let me tell you, I have the statement to give that I arrived at the center as an ordinary Nigerian. I think there are only 2 doctors who knew who I was. So I was given a room like any other patient in Gwagwalada. The room is very small, with bed space. There are limited space available. But you know, that's the lesson learned in life, that I didn't know I could make use of life, however limited it is. That's the experience. This room, very small. But despite that, I was walking around that small space to make the 6,000 steps each day. I'm glad to say the workers were very helpful, not knowing even who I was. They were very friendly. Not only that, they were encouraging that you will recover. And I saw many people, even though our faces were covered, we move around to toilet, wash hands regularly. I saw a lot of young men. Even I saw an elderly man with gray hair, much older than me. I'm sure that man was reaching 70. We were saying the same time, same place. So that gave me hope. I think we need to commend those doctors and nurses working under difficult conditions, even though they arrive in a dress which you cannot recognize their face. It was like people who were going to the moon. But I think the centers were good. We were given food, and it was okay. I lived as an ordinary Nigerian, and I was happy to live as such. And I was discharged. It was after my discharge that someone knew, oh, that was the Controller General of Immigration Service. Then we began to exchange telephone numbers. I think they tried, but we need to commend them.
All right, Comptroller General, well, it's been an experience, you know, coming from a person of your status in government. And of course, it's also served as a note of, as information, you know, coming directly from a person of your status to the rest of Nigerians as to what you went through within that period. We will thank you, and we'll likely return to you for further discussions on the matter. Now back to Abuja studio here. I want to come to you, Doctor.
You know, I know before we bring in Doctor, we understand we have a commercial break.
Commercial break right now.
From
Okay,
the
all right. Okay, so let's go on break. And when we return, the conversation continues. All right, we're back again. And Doctor, you've listened to the Comptroller General and his own experience and all that. I think different people have different experience. Those survivors have different experience, and that goes to show or prove exactly what the doctor said earlier on the proper understanding of the behavioral pattern, you know, of the virus, which of course is now individualistic, if you ask me, right? And doctor, we're talking about studies and the research, you know, that's been on since the advent of this virus, which means that a lot may have been understood by now. We have already explained 2 different stages of understanding and all that. Now, going forward, what would you be telling Nigeria's research institutes or medical research institutes as to what we can do to see whether it's possible for us to also develop our own homemade therapeutic approach to this virus, in terms of perhaps changing the protocol, medical protocol being approached at this moment, localize it and see how we can now come up with something very indigenous that can give us a better result, having the understanding of the virus's behavior at the moment?
Well, thanks What I'm going to say is this. Let our scientists and the various research institutions, be open, because one of the greatest scientists that ever lived, that is Albert Shinjoji, said, discovery is seeing what everyone has seen, but doing what nobody has done. So we should be very open. Especially on the
very
aspect...
open and then protecting your intellectual property anyway.
Well, yeah, thank you. That's what I mean. Open in the sense of, accepting things new, trying new things. Because there are some people who are locked out there. Once it is something that they were not taught or something they've read in books, then any other new thing, they will say no to it, without even going through, the basic, analysis. I remember at the onset of COVID-19, our president told us in his first speech that we should look inwards as well. In as much as we will follow the WHO guidelines, we should also look inward. Up to today, how much have we looked inward? There are a lot of these proposals, remedies that are of, natural product or alternative ways, but the typical guys in their own cocoon, with all due respect, will not just be open, that's what I mean, by accepting them and say, okay, let's subject this to, scientific trial. But, it kind of become bothersome. Anything you mention, you said, oh, have clinical trials been done on it? Great, clinical trials are good. But do you really know what it means to do clinical trials, with all due respect? Until we wait, maybe half of the population is gone before we start doing anything. To do clinical trials, it has different phases. And for you to do clinical trials, what they call the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, studies. You know what it takes, to do those things. I think what I mean by open is that anything that has been proposed, subjected to the basic, scientific, scrutinization. Just like what NAFDAC does in registration of some of these herbal products or some of the nutraceuticals or the supplement, is just to prove that there is safety and efficacy. And if you look at it, the International Conference on Harmonization, that's what it says about, herbal remedies or these nutraceuticals. You only have to prove that they are safe and then the efficacy. When you talk about a drug that you are claiming cure, yes, you need to do what they call proof of concept, because there are certain ways that drugs act. You have to prove that your drug works in that way. Either it is ion channel mediated, whether it is cyclic AMP mediated, or whether it is receptor mediated. That's why you do clinical trials. But if any of these remedies, how do you do the clinical trials on a compound that has so many mix, so many other mix? It has different things inside. Just prove, the safety. So this is my advice, that we should be open. And Kinsley, that's what I mean by being open.
Open, that's right.
Yes.
I got your explanation now, Dr. Agbidia. Let's return to Professor Olakpade Olakpa, the immediate past provost of College of Medicine at the University of Ibadan. Professor Emiola, well, you've mentioned antibodies apparently as part of the means of ascertainment that your College of Medicine is also exploring with regard to detecting coronavirus. And then you were referencing South Africa, that's probably what they do in addition to the regular COVID-19 test. But here we are. South Africa has recorded well over 500,000 COVID-19 cases, and over 300,000 persons have recovered. But they have also had 10 times more than Nigeria, the number of fatalities. Over 9,000 persons have died in South Africa. In Nigeria, we're still sub 1,000. I'm certainly you may not have information as to the epidemiology of coronavirus in South Africa, but how do we explain this? Is it the access to antibody verification that is bringing out all of this data, or what more? How do we contextualize all of that?
Well, again, thank you very much for inviting me to this program to shed some light from the science industries, or these biomedical research industries. First, I must comment very briefly on the issue of clinical trials, because this is part of our remit, and these are very, very important areas of research that we must undertake with this COVID-19 pandemic. And it feeds into the question you've asked me. I must agree with Dr. John Toabide that clinical trials are not exactly the easiest things to do. But each country must undertake these trials, because not all drugs that work in other climes work the same way in different communities. That is why we're different from each other. In our own institution, we have the first clinical drug trials and toxicology unit in the country. And we are planning to undertake these clinical trials, including the sort of community trial studies that would enable us tie it up with the question you've asked me. The importance of antibody testing and seroprevalence it comes in when you can match it with what are you going to do about it. And that invariably means you're talking about medications, at least in the first instance. If you look at the question you've asked me, South Africa has tested more, and they've had, as you've said, on the face of it, more mortality. All those statistics are because they've done more research than we've done. Even the United Kingdom admitted very early into their statistics that they were not counting everybody who could have died from COVID-19. That was why their figures were better than Europe. They were not counting people who were dying in elderly care homes who could have died from COVID-19. Are we counting all the people who could have died from COVID-19 in Nigeria before we can compare our figures with South Africa? Are we counting the same things? We need to ensure that the statistics that we're comparing are the same. This is the realms of biomedical research. And when you say they've tested 500,000 or they found 500,000, they've done seroprevalence. Are we doing the same thing? Do we have that capacity? We need to build that capacity. We have 22 medical schools. We have several other biomedical research institutions, NIMA and the like. All these are institutions that should be engaged and allowed to actually prove that they are useful to the country. The essence of biomedical, or indeed the essence of tertiary institutions, is to drive the economy of their nation, not of any other nation, of their nation. And that they can only do by carrying out meaningful research into events such as this pandemic. The opportunities provided by COVID for universities in particular, it's mind-boggling. All faculties in any university will be involved to give these answers that you're asking for. Even the development of the antibodies is going to involve a village of scientists, technologists, industry. And that is what South Africa has. It's not just that they have factories where they are testing or producing antibodies. How do you know which antibodies to produce? We don't. The antibodies in Nigerians is not the same as the antibodies in South Africans. They may be called the same thing, but they're not the same, because the exposure of Nigerians is different from the exposure of South Africans, which is why when people cross from one border to another, they are more susceptible to the diseases in that new environment that they've not been previously exposed to. So it's a really good opportunity for government and industry and the universities to work together to get to the root of COVID-19 in Nigeria, for Nigeria, by Nigerians, and not just simply adopt information that is coming from outside. We must keep our eyes on the information coming from outside. It's very important. They're far more advanced. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. That is okay. It just saves us on research and development. But it's difficult for us to make any meaningful statements using data from other countries and then willy-nilly testing, accepting what they say they are doing. Just briefly before you move on, it was known, for example, one particular drug that was used to treat hypertension in the UK. It was certified, we used it here. Quite a few people died. When it was investigated, we found out that in Nigeria, instead of bringing down high blood pressure, it further raised the high blood pressure because of peculiarities of Nigerians, and people died. So that is why you have to carry out these tests. The problem is, as Dr. John Torobie has said, they are expensive. But you must invest in your own industry. This is an investment. Once you invest in your industry, then you reap the benefits. Then we'll be able to share meaningful scientific and industry data with other countries and make our own rewards from it. That is called a knowledge economy. We are big enough as a country to get into it. We have 200 million people. The universities can do this job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. When it became obvious, that coronavirus pandemic is going to surprise the world, is when no nation could even rely on WHO, on the remedies, that could be applied to attack the virus. And it has become more obvious, that many countries should have to look inwards on their own to see whether, it is possible for you to develop an indigenous methodology, medical methodology, that could be used. But what is good is that whatever is being applied at the moment in terms of medication is working for Nigeria. From the figures Kingsley was raising and making comparing with South Africa. Of course, when it comes to the issue of knowledgeability with respect to this virus, South Africa has shown tremendous, advancement from what Prof had just explained. All right. Well, gentlemen, we just received a number of tweets, by Nigerians who are also trying to make contributions to the conversation, and we have them right here. Kingsley and I will have to read out some of them. First, we have from Mutana Farouk. I don't see any reason for stigmatizing survivors of COVID-19 in the first instance. Instead of empathizing with them, perhaps sharing their experiences would help to douse the anxiety and the fear of the dreaded virus. The initiative is really commendable.
Festus Akimboyewa, thousands of Nigerians who have survived COVID-19 are really blessed, and their experiences should deepen their appreciation of our medical staff. There must be rehabilitation centers across our country to help those most seriously affected by the deadly virus.
Dr. Solomon, it is important for governments at all levels to engage the service of survivors to keep up with the pace of sensitizing Nigerians, to let them know that coronavirus is real, easily contractable, and if we do not work together as a people, it will defeat us. This is the message.
All right, Mike Ayankwo, it is very interesting listening to COVID-19 survivors narrate their experiences. Many said the sickness is real. One may laugh when some said something about the medications, which include even ogogoro, but be that as it may, prevention is better than cure. All COVID-19 protocols must be observed in its entirety. Mike Ayankwo, it's not on Good Morning Nigeria that you heard that the medication includes ogogoro.
Of course. Low Alpha C, COVID-19 survivors sharing their experiences is a welcome development as a way of rubbishing the myth surrounding the stigmatization of infected persons and allay the fears that coronavirus is real, yet not a death sentence after all.
Chris Simeon, we overcame Ebola virus. Now, if we stick to the safety measures, we will also overcome COVID-19. Now, the good news is that for the past 4 days, Nigerians have witnessed a decline in confirmed cases.
Delejak Solomon, with the account of survivors of COVID-19, we should try as much as possible to self-isolate by staying at home as much as possible and practice social distancing so that we do not infect other people. Should we have the virus and not even know it, this is a sacrosanct.
Bashiro tweets, the problem we are facing with COVID-19 is the widely held perception that the pandemic is a scam. Unlike the more advanced countries where hundreds of victims are interviewed real-time in hospitals, in Nigeria, low coverage of victims has led to all sorts of speculations. I think we need to make a comment on this. When you say that victims are interviewed real-time in hospitals, in which of the jurisdictions. Those are ICUs, and who is allowed to go in there with a microphone.
Yes.
And ICU stands for Intensive Care Unit. And for those who, this is the third in our series of getting survivors of COVID-19 to share their experiences. Today we have had three of them. Koka is here with us in the studios. Professor Emiola from University of Ibadan is there via Zoom in Ibadan. We have the Comptroller General of Immigration Service also telling you their experience. Last week we had a Deputy Governor of Bauchi State. We had a Governor of Ondo State, and indeed several other Nigerians, Dr. Otabo, who was here with us in the studios, and also Professor Habib from Kano, and several others who have told us their experience. There are many others whom, of course, we can't get everybody right into the studio. COVID-19 is not a scam.
Yeah, and it's only that, Kingsley, what is it need to get real time from hospital?
Absolutely.
What is it need? What do you stand to gain by doing that?
What did they pay you to be in the hospital for about 16 days, Koka?
so
I mean, let's face it.
Yeah, so Bashir, I hope you have taken note of that. Now, Omobola Babs, let's hope that survivors coming out to recount their experiences will further accentuate the fact that COVID-19 is real. It's unfortunate that many Nigerians still believe the pandemic is a ruse, including the political class. So people coming out, it's a good one. I met someone at a cyber cafe, that was last week. Somebody I consider to be a gentleman. I mean, let's say educated, all things being equal, and he didn't have a face mask. And I argued with him. So why don't you have this? He said, look, like if he has his way, he's going to deal with NCDC personnel. I said, why? He said, because they're telling him nonsense about it. I said, look, you saying this kind of thing, I could not believe that, just last week.
That's most unfortunate. Part of what he just saying now is embedded in the tweet by Awalu Salehu. It says part of the problem is lack of consistency. That should be sustenance. Because even in big supermarkets now, the vigor has waned. Most people no longer provide sanitizers or do temperature checks, not to mention social distancing. We need to be consistent in public places.
Sir Idris, I'm glad to hear that schools will be reopened. COVID-19 is real. Let's sensitize and mobilize pupils on the ravaging effects of the virus. God bless Nigeria.
All right, so those are the tweets that we'll take at this time. And on that note, we'd like to appreciate all our guests and those who also sent in their tweets. We're joined in this conversation by Muhammad Bandede, who is Comptroller General of the Nigeria Immigration Service. He joined us via Zoom. Also via Zoom today, we had Professor Emiola Olakpade Olaokpa, immediate past Provost, College of Medicine, University of Ibadan. Prof, thank you very much for being part of our discussion this morning. Here in the Abuja studios, we had Mr. Yomi Koka, a security consultant and a survivor of coronavirus. Thank you very much and best of luck. And of course, providing the medical perspective in terms of further analysis and insight, Dr. John Tor Agbedie. Thank you very much. We always appreciate you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure.
All right, so that does it for our conversation segment. Let's go over now to our sports desk.
Nigerian forward Sylvester Egbon says he is pleased to continue his stay at Dynamo Moscow after signing a permanent deal with the Russian top division. Egbon penned a 2-year contract with the White and Blues on Tuesday. The 29-year-old spent last season on loan at Dynamo Moscow from another Russian outfit, FC Ufa. Egbon scored 2 goals and registered 1 assist in 20 league appearances for the club during the 2019-20 season. He has now thanked the team's management for their belief in his ability, saying he was looking forward to helping the team in the next 2 seasons. In other news, UEFA has warned that the staging of international protocols will be at risk if its protocols for the return of the Champions League and Europa League are not observed. Both tournaments resumed this week after a 5-month delay because of the coronavirus pandemic. The protocols were distributed to all 28 teams still in the 2 competitions. Both competitions conclude with the final 8 tournaments behind closed doors in Portugal and Germany. The Champions League final will be held in Lisbon on 23rd August, 2 days after the Europa League final takes place in Cologne.